Hello and welcome again to another episode of One Starfish, where our mission is to help change the world one person or one starfish at a time. As always, make sure to rate, review, subscribe. That's how we get the word out. Appreciate all of that. I'm excited for our guest today. Kyle and I just met. He ran a business with over 15,000 employees, so that's a lot. Now is an author, inspirational speaker, lives in Florida with his wife and doing some amazing things. Just wrote a book about principle-based leadership, if I got that right. Excited to have you on, Kyle.
It's really great to be here, Angela. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Well, let's get into things. So, what got you into running, the company, and how did that transpire? And then what got you out of it?
Oh gosh, what a great question. I was in big time corporate world for nearly 30 years, and I started from very humble beginnings, a tiny cubicle, and managed to kind of work my way through the machine, and found myself 28 years later leading a team of about 15,000 people. And just, for some context, my last two roles combined before I exited to write my book and start my own business, I led 30,000 employees. Um, it's been primarily focused on operations, where obviously people play a huge role in the success or lack of any organization. And I think my journey was really no different than so many, and especially those in your audience. I entered the workforce with a great amount, an inordinate amount of optimism and excitement. I wanted to do big things. I wanted to make an impact. I wanted to make a lot of money. I wanted to leave what I call a leadership legacy. I wanted to leave my mark on the world. But what I found was, with each passing year, that optimism and energy started to trade for apathy. I'd gotten so kind of sour against the whole machine, the bureaucracy, the dysfunction, the toxicity, the bad actors that I ended up working around and with, and at times was myself. And all of this came to a head for me in 2017, when I had to step away from the corporate world, because at that point I had a divorce that was pending. My health was not in the best shape I could have been in, and I was just so disenchanted and disenfranchised, ironically, from the very environments that I was creating, which is a real time of confusion for me. So I stepped away, and I made a commitment to myself that if I was going to get back into the fray, I was going to do it in a way that I had never done. I was going to lead in a way that I had never led. I wanted to be the leader that I never had. And lo and behold, kind of be careful what you wish for. I took a role that had been pretty clear that there were some opportunities for a cultural transformation, and the fellow who hired me was pretty open that I could lead autonomously. So I felt like it was a really ripe opportunity for me to make this change. And the night before I was going to meet with the top 40 or 50 leaders of this newly inherited organization, I knew I needed to bring a message that was unique and different than what they had heard their entire careers, because I was warned that there was a fair amount of dysfunction inside of the organization, but also a fair amount of apathy, and as well as just a lack of real energy, and a lack of a team environment. So that night before, I had my laptop in my lap. I was trying to put together a quick PowerPoint to share with the team the next morning. And I, without any pre-planning, and certainly had no idea that I would be here with you a year and a half later after my book were to come out. I had no idea I'd even be writing a book, frankly. These 10 sentences stared back at me on my laptop. They each begin with the word we. I'm not incredibly creative, so I had the 10 we's. And what followed in this organization, and then dozens of organizations since then, was a transformation unlike anything I had seen the first 20 plus years of my career. Not only did the business results dramatically improve, we also saw bosses transform into leaders, and they reconnected with that passion and sense of optimism that they had also lost throughout their journey. So at this crossroads, a few years later, I just made the decision that I had a bigger calling than leading any one or two organizations. And I put pen to paper. It took me a year and a half to write a book. It became a USA Today and Wall Street Journal bestseller. And we sold about 15,000 copies since the book has come out. And now I spend essentially every waking moment evangelizing these principles, the value of principle-based leadership, and trying to help others kind of dig out of that malaise that I found myself within.
I mean, lots of people talk about we. So, I mean, they're trained to talk about we. What do you feel the difference was?
Living it, living it. I knew when I took the role that I mentioned earlier and where these principles were created. Um, I'd seen. I wanted to avoid. I want to be very careful to avoid being the guy that I had seen so many times throughout my career and even been at times, and that was step in front of a team and say what I was here to do, how I was going to save this team, the things that I brought to the table. That would have been hollow. I knew that I needed this team for me to be successful because they had forgotten more about the roles that they were in than I had yet learned.
Right.
And I needed them. And I had a sense that if I were to approach this right, they might need me as well. Um, so not only I was very stern to say that these principles would be the principles to which I would hold my team accountable, and I was very direct about that because I said, I expect you, and this is not double speak. I expect you to hold me just as accountable. And there was some hemming and hawing, and I think half the group was probably really excited about what I'd introduced, but there were some folks that were not, and they challenged me at every corner. One of the principles is we embrace challenge. And I knew had I reacted in the classic boss fashion, the way I wanted to, frankly, I would have been a hypocrite and everything else would have been kind of a house of cards. So I had to live it every single day. And not only did I show them that I was up to embrace their challenge of kind of thinking I was full of it, but also I I I made it a habit to insert the word we in essentially as many conversations as possible. It would go something like, hey, Angela, we need to have a tough conversation and we challenge each other, right? Another one of the principles is we challenge each other. We challenge each other, right? So the more I would insert insert we into the daily vernacular, but also demonstrate that I was more focused on we than I was I, this momentum really started to begin to the point where I would show up at we had 11 locations. I would bounce around the country to see all of the facilities that were in the portfolio. And I started to see signs and coffee mugs and these 10 we bracelets that I still wear so many years later. So living it is the short answer.
So, what do you think the biggest problem that leaders have that aren't living it? Why aren't they living it? Because I think most leaders do want a we culture. I run an organization. I would say we want a we culture. What do you find is the problem why people aren't running it?
Well, I think it's so situational, but if I had to categorize one or two things that are the culprit, I think there's a lack of real security, genuine self-confidence that a lot of what I would call bosses versus leaders portray themselves to be um, not a know-it-all, but they and because I was this guy, by the way, so I say this with full understanding and respect. You know, they approach their teams as if they have all of the answers. Their ego won't allow them to step down and say, you know, the collective wisdom in this room is certainly much more powerful than any one of us combined. So us approaching these the tough challenges that come when you run a business or are a part of a team in any industry, when we lock arms and approach those challenges as one versus as one team rather versus just one individual, um, the change and the ability to let go of some of that ego and become a little bit vulnerable, frankly, as a leader is the transformation that has had the biggest impact on me. Now, I'm not naive. It sounds very simple. In some circles, it might sound even a bit corny, but simple is not easy, and living it every single day is not easy. So living it, but also recognizing that you don't have to have all the answers. You lean into your team for their perspectives, the unique perspectives that they all bring, and count on them as much as they can count on you. So it's really a two-way street.
I'm curious now, switching a little bit. So you went from building this company, working for this guy, to now running on your own as an entrepreneur. Tell us a little bit about why you transitioned and how did people take that? Because you would have obviously been pretty successful on a financial standpoint, I'm guessing, with the company you're running, if you're, in charge of 30,000 employees, pretty successful that way. And then to like quit that and go into entrepreneurship is a massive change. What were some of the obstacles you have overcome so far? And how would you suggest someone that maybe wants to do something similar?
Yeah, love that question. And I need to provide a bit of context because I think it kind of outlines why I am where I am and do what I do. So after I introduced these principles to that organization, the changes that followed were just simply profound. And it attracted the attention of other organizations, so much so that I ended up leaving that firm to go run another portfolio of operations for a massive pharmaceutical company, Fortune 10 firm. And it was there that I learned, after coming off such a high of watching dramatic transformation, I took these principles to another organization and I learned very candidly the toxicity in that place was just too deep. I was hired to lead a transformation, but when it came time to make some difficult decisions, and by the way, the gentleman who hired me in that role was unceremoniously dismissed. So my biggest sponsor of this transformation was now gone. I learned that the dysfunction was so deep and so ingrained in the DNA that it just wasn't a good fit. So about a year into that gig, I left, but I had a contract, and that contract required me to sit on the bench. I had a non-compete. So this was a time of real self-reflection for me. The high that I'd experienced, then followed by a disappointing run at another company, it prompted me to look differently at who I was, my identity, because for so many years, I associated my corporate life and my identity in that corporate life with who I was as a person on this planet, which is an incredibly silly thing to do, but so many of us do it. So that was liberating to recognize that. But this time of this, let's call it my severance, when I had this non-compete, I had a choice, and it was to kind of marinate on what I wanted to do next, or should I take some action, put these words to paper, and I should add, the loudest voices who were encouraging me and advocating to write the book were members of my team from the company, the prior company, that said, "Okay, Kyle, it's time. You got to take this bigger." So the transition from 28-year W-2, corporate America guy to entrepreneur was one of real challenge for me, because it's a very different, as you know, it's a very different mindset. And leading such a massive organization, frankly, let's admit it, I was able to say, I could lean into the team much more easily because the team was so massive. I was surrounded by really smart people who could help me do anything from like find the restroom all the way to build a strategic plan for the organization. I had people everywhere to help me. The biggest change was I was a team of one for the first several months of launching my own firm. And with that came lots of challenges, but also a lot greater sense of reward, because I was building something from the ground up instead of inheriting something that had already been in existence. And I will tell you this, man, the biggest change from big corporate guy to solo entrepreneur had to do with trying to connect with what I now call my life's purpose. I genuinely, in my heart of hearts, believe I'm doing exactly what I'm supposed to be doing, helping other people not experience that malaise of toxicity that we've all just kind of grown to be used to in our roles. Not, everybody kind of grows up thinking they should hate their roles if they're inside of somebody else's company. It doesn't have to be that way. So making that choice to approach my professional life differently was the biggest transition for me. And then leaning into people that had traveled this road before me. I've got some mentors that I partner with to get great advice from. They're there. I lean on them. That's been a huge transition for me.
What were some of the obstacles you like your family, your friends, it's a big thing, were they just like, "Oh my gosh, that makes so much sense." Or did you have a lot of naysayers, and how did you handle that?
Both. I'll never forget when I decided to write the book, a friend of mine, who I have a tremendous amount of respect for, literally verbatim said to me, "Who wants to read a book from you?" And I listened to him. The biggest obstacle for me, and I'm open and okay enough to admit, was and still is a bit of imposter syndrome. Even having led tens of thousands of employees, leading profit and loss efforts that are in the eight figures, a pretty solid resume. I still, to this day, struggle with a bit of imposter syndrome. And I think that is something that not a lot of people will talk about, certainly won't admit to. But for me, I recognize it, and I use it as fuel to get better every day.
So how did you overcome that? That's a hard comment, especially from someone you admire, someone that's close to you. And I
Yeah.
think a lot of people listening to this probably have had similar, and that's normally what's taken them out. So what kept you in to follow it anyway? And what advice would you give someone that maybe is going through the similar situation?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And I wish there was a nice, clean, tidy answer to give you because admittedly, Angela, there are days, even to this day. So I've sold way more books than I ever expected to. I am on stage almost weekly now. I've got a roster of executive clients that I coach. It's going really, really well. But there are still days that I lay my head down and wonder, what am I doing? Like, what value did I bring to the world today? Am I chasing something that's never going to be as big or as prominent as I think it can be? And then there are days where, I'll get a message from a reader, or I'll get a message from someone that I'm doing some work with, and they share how much the principles have impacted their life and the changes that they're making as a result of these principles. So it's a balancing act. The advice I would give to anyone who's experienced or is maybe in the middle of experiencing something similar to what I just described is allowing yourself a little bit of grace. As cliche as it sounds, we're not in a sprint; it is a marathon. If you are absolutely in your heart of hearts committed to doing what you're doing, you feel it is more than just a job. It is a purpose. It is something that you are genuinely passionate about. Don't listen to others. Especially don't listen to others who are not walking or have walked a similar path as you. Why would you take advice or criticism from someone who has not done what you're trying to do, who is trying to, essentially project their insecurities and their inability to execute on their dreams onto you? Don't listen to that garbage. That for me has been the biggest. Now, the fellow that said to me, who's going to read a book from you? We're still buddies. He's entitled to his opinion. But every month when I get the sales figures, I'm really happy to share them with him.
I was gonna say, do you share
Sure.
it?
I do. Absolutely. I do. Sure. I do. Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
Maybe it'll stop them from saying that to the next person.
Amen. That's right.
Yeah.
And it's really what it is. I saw a quote from Kobe Bryant many years ago. Something, I'll probably botch it, but he said something like, um, don't project your insecurities and what you think you can't do on me. So just because you don't think you can write a book and reach people and change their lives doesn't mean I can't. Likewise, there's certain things that you're certainly capable of that I can't. But I'm not going to allow your opinion on what I can and can't do to dictate the efforts that I give and the impact on the world that I want to have.
I love it. So let's get down to the nitty gritty. So you went and opened your own business, came from, like I said, making pretty good income, I'm guessing, probably
Yeah.
six, multiple six, and if not more, whatever, but doing well, and then like zero. So what kind of work ethic, because I think people live in a very delusional world, and I don't even know, maybe I'm going to be off. What kind of work ethic did you put in when you came into your own business in order to build something, a book, executive clientele, all the things? I looked up your Instagram, you've got a lot of followers. What are some things that you did in those first 6 months that separated you from all the other people out there that are trying to do the same thing as you are?
I think for me, it's been structure. So holding myself accountable. It's easy to make a commitment to someone else and keep that commitment. A lot of us are not very good at keeping commitments to ourselves.
Amen.
And I think through a fair amount of self-reflection and being open and honest about the things that I'm pretty good at versus the things that I'm not so good at, and spending dedicated time addressing head on those things that I know that I'm not good at. And that comes through a variety of ways. You pick a topic, you can find a how-to, a learn more, a hack, which I'm not a big fan of that expression, but there is an unlimited amount of how-to information on the internet. And it's our job to find the right message that resonates with what we're trying to do. We kind of weed out the nonsense, the garbage, the panderers, the charlatans, and find what works and resonates for you. So establishing a structure. I get up every single day, 7 days a week, the same time of day, essentially, give or take 30 minutes. I've got a routine every single morning that sets me up for what I hope to be a productive day. Invariably, there are curveballs that come my way, but I know every single day the list of things that I want to accomplish. And I am I do allow myself some grace. So if I don't hit that to-do list every single day, I just make sure it goes over to the next day. But I'm purposeful about the time that I spend. And it's almost every day. At the end of the day, my wife will swing by the office and say something like, are you about done? Or, how much more work you have? And my answer is, every time she asks that, it's like, there's always more to do. There's always more to do. But it's just a matter of prioritizing those things and being kind of thoughtful enough to recognize the things that are adding value versus the things that are just activity, and then trying to prioritize more efforts towards outcomes than activities.
That's true. What are some of the things that you try to do every day that you feel have set you up for success?
For me, it starts the night before. I am such a proponent and understand the value of a good night's sleep. And there's more and more data that supports this, getting 7 to 8 hours every single night consistently, go to bed at the same time, get up at the same time, has had a huge impact on me. So the night before, trying to wind down and get in bed at a decent hour, but then also being, even the days I don't want to, because it does happen, but it's not as common as it used to be for me anyway. Get up in the morning, get some physical activity in, get a good sweat going. I like to meditate in the mornings, but also being really purposeful the first couple hours of the day to think through what it is that I want to accomplish that day. I go through this thing called the mirror of truth. I talk about it in the book. And sometimes it's literally in front of a mirror, but usually not. Oftentimes it's at my desk. It is computer asleep, phone not in my hand. And I go through this series of questions that I love to ask myself. They vary from day to day, but mostly they're the same. Did I make good on my commitments yesterday? Was I the person, the leader that I wanted to be and be portrayed as? Did I add value to those I interacted with? And am I someone that can be proud of the way I behaved in nearly every single interaction that I had? And those series of questions, again, just kind of a different slant on self-reflection, usually position me to either continue the good things that come out of that conversation with myself, and also reevaluate, address, and maybe approach the things that I wasn't so happy or flattered about, and approach those in a different way.
I love that. That's awesome. So in wrapping up, I always have 3 final questions, and then anything we didn't touch on that you think would be really impactful for our listeners. As always, guys, we're going to have all the information in the show notes. So if you want to reach out to Kyle, of course, do that, and his book and all of that kind of stuff. But first and final question is, if someone is looking for their purpose, you mentioned this, so if someone's looking for their purpose, what's one sentence you could say that could help them find their purpose?
I'll go even shorter than a sentence, and it's be you. Be you. And what does that mean? So I can speak for myself in this, but I do think that it's not a unique scenario. And that is, we end up following paths that, whether it's personal, professional, or anywhere in between, we follow paths that aren't necessarily best for us, but they are the most convenient. And we end up almost being boxed into that thing, whatever that thing is. And when I say be you, that is, find the thing or series of things that gives you, really 3 things: gives you joy, allows you to make a little bit of money, and has an impact. If you can find the thing, the sweet spot in those 3 things, makes you happy, gives you joy, is one. Again, make a little bit of money, but have an impact. And that impact can be evaluated and assessed any way that you like. The impact could be on yourself. It could be on clients that you serve. It could be on your community, anything you like. When you're somebody else, or you behave in a way that's inauthentic to who you really are, it's hard to find that trifecta of things. So really do some reflection on who you are, who you want to be portrayed as, what kind of legacy do you want to leave when your days are over, and then try to find something in there. Now, when I say that, Angela, I recognize there's probably a fair amount of eye rolling in that. Well, this guy, spent so many years in corporate America, had a little bit of money in the bank. He's allowed to, behave and do things a little bit differently. I'm a very lucky guy. There's no doubt about that. However, everything is relative. I started from very humble beginnings. This new journey that I'm on, I started with really just kind of a dream and a laptop to write a book. But I tried to be always true to who I really am, in spite of naysayers, people pulling me in different directions. And, let's admit it, I think 99% of all authors sell less than 100 books. So I walked into a space that is saturated, and there's, a lot of also rans. but I know this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm not perfect at it. Try to get better at it every single day. Talking to folks like you is tremendously helpful. But the theme through all of that is I'm going to continue to be me.
Cool. I like that. Second question is, what's a favorite quote and why?
I think my favorite quote is from Marcus Aurelius. Um, and it is just that you do the right thing. The rest doesn't matter. One of my 10 principles is we do the right thing always. And it has helped me. And the reason why is that statement or quote plays in the back of my mind on the smallest of things in my life. So, for example, I used to be the guy, I don't know how this works in Canada, but I assume it's similar. I used to be the guy that would go grocery shopping, load the groceries up in my car, and I would leave the grocery cart in the parking spot next to me. I was that guy. I loathe that guy now, but I was that guy. Until one day, this was after the principles were created, I unloaded my groceries into the car, pulled the cart over next to the where my car was, and I pulled away, and I could see the cart in my rearview mirror. And I thought, you are such a hypocrite. You're the guy that's evangelizing me to do the right thing always. You know, leaving that cart is not the right thing. So I circled around, and this has been several years ago now, never have since left another grocery cart in the parking lot. I know it sounds like a trivial example, but here's the point. When we commit to do something and hold ourselves accountable to something like just that you do the right thing, always, always means always. So it helps me when I'm making big decisions, struggling with things that are maybe a little bit more gnarly than other things like grocery carts. But it also has allowed me to keep perspective for every single thing that I do and try to maintain a high standard of keeping myself accountable to that principle. So that quote means a lot to me.
I love that. I always like the one, how you do one thing is how you do everything. And
Amen.
it's, yeah,
Well said.
yeah,
Yep.
it's so true. I say it to myself a lot.
I love that.
And third and final question for me is, what's one word or sentence you want on your gravestone?
He was a guy that cared and wanted to leave people and places in a better place than when he found them.
It's good. I like it. So you're running someone in the coffee shop and they've listened to this and they've learned a lot. What's something we didn't touch on though that you just think would be really impactful for our listeners?
I love that question. There is this, and I kind of touched on it earlier, but I'll go just a hair deeper, maybe take a right turn from it. And that is, we have a choice. Every single day, we're faced with hundreds, if not thousands, of choices. And we make these choices in many cases on autopilot. And I think our professional journey is no different. We get into something, and the busyness of that role, the challenges of that role, sometimes the success that comes with that role, we go into autopilot and we just lather, rinse, repeat every single day. You show up, do the same thing, go home, do it all over the next day. And that autopilot is the absence of making a choice to say, am I making the impact that I set out to make? Did I find the fulfillment that I was hoping to find? Am I on a path that I can look back and say, wow, man, I'm really pleased or proud with what I did. I made a difference. We didn't touch too deeply on it, but the point of where I'm going with is making the choice to do something that you can be proud of, that has an impact on others, lifts others up, adds value, and hopefully makes yourself a little bit of money, is not going to come following directions and being part of a bigger machine that you have no control over. So put yourself in a position, whether it's an entrepreneurial space or inside of an organization, where your opinions, your thoughts, your actions are valued. But don't sleepwalk through your career. I did it for 20 plus years before I found something different, a different way of approaching my career. And the fulfillment that I've found in the last 10 years versus the first 20 is exponentially greater. And it all started with a choice to do something and be something different than I was the first 2 decades.
So good. I couldn't agree with that more. That's a big thing for me. So, and my listeners know me, they know that. Guys, make sure to rate, review, subscribe. If we go out there and we change one life or one starfish at a time, together, we can change the world. Thanks so much for being on, Kyle.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.